It's time now for the penultimate session. Our next panel discussion is on gender lens investing. The awareness among investors on gender diversity has increased over the past few years, with more focus on women-led enterprises, as well as moving towards fair representation in investment teams. LPs are increasingly focusing on SDGs and gender lens investing while making commitments. But the panelists, I'm sure, have lots more to speak about from their own personal experiences, as well as charting out the road ahead. Our distinguished panelists are Ami Momaya, Partner, Direct Investments, National Investment and Infrastructure Fund, NIIF. Jessica Espinoza Trujano, Vice President, Investments, DEG. Marijan Wiseman, I'm sorry if I got your name wrong. Interim Gender Lead CDC Group, Nupur Garg, Founder WinPE, Vidya Chandi, VP Impact Chirate Ventures, and our moderator Shweta Rajpal Kohli, Chief Public Policy Officer, Sequoia India. Over to you, Shweta.
Thank you so much, Shatapa, and it's really an honor for me to be moderating a panel, especially on a subject that's so close to my heart. And, the lack of gender equity and the underrepresentation of women across the board has been a very, very systemic issue. And we all know that the investment world is no different. In fact, we've been part of this ecosystem, and we know that the data is dismal and a lot more needs to be done to advance gender equity goals. In fact, of late, we're seeing that the investor community as well as the entire ecosystem is gearing towards very actionable goals towards meeting gender equity, and some of those goals as well as actions are yielding very positive results. I'm so delighted to have such a power-packed panel here. And while in the traditional sense of the term, it's not a diverse panel, because it's great to have all women on this panel, which is a good problem to have. But I must say that the panel is very diverse in its experience, because I've had the fortune of connecting with each one of the panelists, in the run-up to this session. And I must say, what a wealth of experience and what a wealth of knowledge, as well as very relevant experience to what we're going to discuss today, and which is around gender lens investing. So has gender lens investing really become a very definitive trend that is going to take off and is going to be a trend to watch out for in the years to come? That's something we're going to focus on over the next, about 30 to 40 minutes. Let me start bringing in the panelists to first share with us a little more about them. It's good to understand and know their experiences, to understand and know what they stand for, what's the work that they're doing, which is relevant to the subject that we're discussing today. Nupur, why don't I bring you on board first off? WinPE, tell us all about it, about your experience in the finance world, and how you went about founding an initiative like this, and why it's so significant for you.
Thank you, Shweta. And once again, it's such an extreme pleasure to be a part of this panel. And Shweta, you said exactly what was on my mind. I am concerned that we are only women talking about gender diversity and gender lens investing here. I would love to see a panel with a couple of men on it next year, maybe. I've been an investor. I've been an LP in funds for a long time, more than a decade. And as an LP, I have met hundreds and hundreds of fund managers. And when I look back, I don't recollect more than, say, a single handful of those meetings being with women on the table. And, as an LP, the meetings the fund managers had with me on the performance, on their track record, on their strategy, etc., are presumably some of the most important meetings. And to not have women as part of those conversations, I think is one of those big telling signs of the problem we have. And of course, like most women who are part of the investing industry, I have my own stories, and I have my own experiences. Starting from saying my first industry networking event, I was the only woman on the invite list. I was the only woman in the room. To being by a very well-clad gentleman, at an industry conference, asked me, excuse me, which way is the buffet? And, me trying to put it down to my business suit and sort of saying maybe it was the business suit, but those were early years. And my own understanding of the challenges that exist as far as gender diversity and the participation of women in investing are concerned, my own understanding was really, if I can use the word underdeveloped, I think it would be an understatement. For me, there are probably a couple of turning points if I think about it. And they're interlinked. So I was hiring for my team when I was at IFC, and IFC was a forward-leaning organization, and so we had targets on how many women should be part of a team, and therefore for me the mandate was that I needed to hire a woman. And I was similar to many women out there, sort of saying, why do I need to hire a woman? I want to focus on merit. And look at my candidate list, my short list is all men. So what's the problem? I want to hire the best candidate, but I was told to go back and I was pushed to look for a woman. At the same time, I went through a training on unconscious biases. And I came out of the training to realize that I, supposedly an educated woman, had unconscious biases myself. Some of those stereotypes were sitting in my own mind. And then when I went back to the hiring list and I looked at the candidate pipeline, 7 out of 735 applications were from women. Statistically speaking, what is the probability that any of those 7 women would have made it to the final 10? It's almost zero, right? So for me, this whole circle of understanding the level of challenge and the level of issue that exists was an eye-opener. And it stayed with me. So, it was probably one of the strongest factors that I had in mind when I wanted to set up WinPE. And then, of course, if we look around anecdotally, we sort of see, apart from the data, and IFC has a fantastic report with a lot of relevant data. But anecdotally, in the last decade, if you look within our own market, I don't see a lot of women fund managers getting added to the ranks. And a decade is a really, really long time. And I make this statement again and again, a decade is a really, really long time for us to not have GPs women, right? So all of that came in, and I said, we need to do something about it. And that's how WinPE was born.
Right. And I think Nupur has a very, very clear and actionable agenda as part of WinPE, which is, set the diversity agenda, lead collective action, create gender balance in the investing ecosystem. So that's one part of, and a very, very significant part of how we drive that gender balance within the investment ecosystem. But the other part, of course, is making sure that you're making the right investments, because yes, unless you have the right representation, you cannot go down the other path. And we'll talk a lot more about that as well as we move along. But let me bring on Ami now on the panel, because she's had a rather stellar and interesting career, an interesting shift as she's moved to NIIF. And we would love to hear from you a lot more about your career journey, your thoughts around this subject, and more importantly, the fact that this cannot be assured, and this is a goal that cannot be undertaken unless we have public-private partnership and both government institutions as well as the private sector going hand in hand.
Sure. Shweta, thank you very much. So just a little bit of background about me. So I'm a partner with the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. I'm responsible for infrastructure investments, and infrastructure as a sector is very male dominated, and it remains a very male dominated sector even today. With the NIIF, of course, we are focused on infrastructure investments. We also have a private equity fund and a fund of funds business. Prior to joining the NIIF, I've spent 17 years with Morgan Stanley across businesses and geographies. And I moved to India in 2009 from New York to set up the fund's infrastructure investment business in India. So, I started in 2004, where diversity was not even a thought, because, just getting into the business of finance, was the most important thing. And diversity didn't strike me until a very long time, because when we started, there were a lot of women that you saw around, right? And that's exactly what we see. There are women who start, but as you go to the mid-management and the upper management, those numbers start dwindling very quickly. So, while when you start your career, you're just trying to excel and get to the next level, you suddenly realize over a period of time, you see, some women facing problems, some women who have the perception that things aren't the way that they're supposed to be and drop off. So it's a mixture of a lot of things. Though during the entire journey, I do think we had enough help with respect to support groups, leadership forums, etc., but the numbers didn't really speak for themselves. So I do think in the last 15 years, though, after I've started my journey, there is a lot of awareness with respect to diversity. I do think, people like Nupur and others on this panel are doing a great job, and they're champions for diversity. And that's something I think is the missing link, because people talk about diversity and it's a well-spoken, well-covered subject, even with the media. But when it comes to championing it internally, I do think you need someone who's very, very focused on that topic. So that is one thing that I noticed. Of course, I think there are some women who are just made of steel and, survive. But, there are many who just need that additional push and the support and that ecosystem with respect to the policies, with respect to, the managers around them that need to understand, certain aspects. Coming to the NIIF, I was really surprised and actually very impressed because I didn't know that the ratio of gender diversity that we have 45% women on the team. And I think that's spectacular. Yes. 1/3 of our leadership team is actually women. So I'm actually very, very proud of that fact. And I think the one easy way, I shouldn't say easy because I don't think it's been easy, but the one thing that has really helped us is exactly what Nupur was saying in terms of the resumes that you receive. And what we've tried to do is to keep the resume male to female ratio as 50-50. So if that means that the headhunters need more time, they need to dig these women from various sources, various parts of the industry, we're happy to wait. But that ratio to start with is 50-50. So when it comes to actually identifying good talent, which is available, because I think women are not out there as much as men looking for jobs. And I think that makes also a significant difference when you look at the resumes out there. But that is one thing that has significantly helped us with the ratios, purely with respect to where we are in terms of the fund and the investing setup. Because there are diversities that can be looked at at the fund level. Of course, when we look at the portfolio companies, it may not be the same because like I said, infrastructure is male dominated. And when we come to portfolio companies, we do try initiatives like getting the women as toll collectors as much as we can, providing a safe environment with respect to work hours. Right. We also, for example, in one of our power projects, we had a local community initiative where we gave technical, study for women, where they could then be inducted into the workforce. And half of the women who came into the company was through that initiative. So there's a lot of stuff that we can also do at the ground level to improve the gender ratios. And like I said, we're not fully there yet, but definitely we're scratching the surface and, we are on the right journey there.
Interesting, absolutely, Ami, and we will of course try to do a deeper dive into each of the success stories that you've mentioned there. But let me now bring Jessica on board. Jessica is Vice President Investments at DEG, and we know that DEG has been leading a number of initiatives, and especially as the chair for the 2X challenge as well as the 2X collective. There's a wealth of information that she has to share with us, especially in trying to understand whether institutional level support for achieving objectives like these works or does not work, and is it important to set goals and in stone and try to achieve those goals, and what has been the experience so far? Jessica, take it away.
Thank you, Shweta. So as you mentioned, I have like this double role. On the one hand, I'm Vice President for Venture Capital and Private Equity Investment at DG, the German Development Finance Institution, and I'm also the chair of the 2X Challenge, which is an initiative that was launched by a number of DFIs. And for us, I would say all of the DFIs that are organized in the 2X Challenge, the journey really started in 2018 when we looked at our portfolio as well as with our own internal gender diversity. And we realized that if we, I mean, long we didn't even have gender disaggregated data, especially at the investment level. So we didn't necessarily realize that we had a problem in terms of gender gaps. And I think the availability of data has really made it visible that even if you're a development finance institution and you consider yourself at the forefront of focusing not only on profit, but also on impact, and of course you want to have equal opportunity and all of that. But if you have a gender blind approach, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are free of bias, as has been mentioned. And that applies both to the internal organization, but also to the way we invest and allocate capital. And we have realized that as DFIs, well, we are LPs, so we invest in funds and play an important role as capital allocators in that sense, but we also invest directly into companies. So we have like this double responsibility, and we also see that we have an important signaling effect in the market. So if the DFIs, don't allocate capital in a way that is free of gender bias and really based on merit and fairness, then I think we have a wider industry problem. And so we got started in 2018. We launched a 2X challenge at the G7 summit, and it was initially a joint commitment of all of us to look at our core business and to apply an intentional gender lens to everything we do, to every deal, in every asset class, region, and sector. And we gave ourselves the challenge to invest at least $3 billion with a gender lens by the end of 2020. And at the time, it really was a challenge. So it was quite a big leap of faith of our CEOs to get out there on this big stage and to make that commitment, because we hadn't done this before. And it was really a big challenge. And the first thing we did was to develop the 2X investment framework. So to define what does good look like, what does gender lens investing even mean, and how do we operationalize it? And we decided to look beyond just women's ownership, because I think traditionally we've often looked at women as entrepreneurs, and that of course is very important, but I think it has created a bit of a blind spot where everybody's focusing on microfinance, but nobody realizes that private equity and venture capital does not get allocated to women entrepreneurs. And so we said, okay, let's look at women's ownership and entrepreneurship, but also at women in leadership, on the board of directors, on the investment committees, also women in employment, and not only in horrible employment like often before, but also at the quality of jobs, policies, and practices at the enterprise level that promote gender diversity, women's career advancement, that challenge gender stereotypes, as well as products and services that benefit women, because we know that traditionally products have often been designed based on a male prototype, or like an average male user or persona. And so really looking at the entire value chain there.
No, that's fantastic, Jessica. And it's actually this well-rounded approach, which is fascinating, I think, which is what is working, because if you try and target just one of these many goals, then it's very harder to achieve that kind of success and yield, quantifiable results in trying to further the goals. So we'll talk about each of those things that you've mentioned, but let me go over to Vidya. Vidya, of course, as we know, is with Chirate Ventures and the Vice President for Impact Measurement. Vidya, share with us a little more about the need for impact investment. How do you define impact investment, and where does gender sit in that entire piece?
Sure. Thanks so much, Shweta, and really happy to be here today. Glad that gender is getting a spotlight in this forum and audience. So just a very short background on Chirate Ventures. We are one of India's leading technology-focused venture capital firms in India. We're a mainstream investor, and we've had over 900 million assets under management, $900 million since inception, and about 100 investments across various sectors. Now, coming to ESG and impact, all our new funds since 2016 have been ESG integrated for risk. And with my joining about 2 years ago, we started the impact practice, where we measure and report the impact created by our portfolio, as well as the UN SDG contribution. We look at ways in which we can collaborate with the industry and contribute to the development of the industry. So one of the initiatives that we are part of is the 2X challenge that Jessica was talking about earlier. We've recently been qualified for the 2X challenge by our LP CDC group. And we are the first venture capital fund in South Asia to be qualified by CDC. And we have another qualification by another DFI coming up, which is not yet announced. So in a sense, we are also looking at the signaling of interest in gender that, again, Jessica was referring to by capital, by our LPs and DFIs and MDBs, where we find that the way ESG has now become mainstream and become table stakes in a sense, we find that impact is also heading that way. And I'd just like to make a small correction, if you may, on terminology here. We are not an impact investor. There is no intentionality in terms of us investing, through an IC decision, whether we invest in or not in a particular company. Sure. We do much of our work post-investment in terms of looking at not the entire value chain and all the stakeholders where women are represented, and in the various development impact themes that we focus on, which is reach to the underserved, both in terms of geography as well as population. We look at gender, we look at MSMEs, and we look at employment and employability.
And Vidya, that's even more fascinating because when you're saying that the investments are mainstream, but what you're really looking out for is to create that practice that will help understand if you can bring about that impact through your impact investment practice to understand it post-investment. And that's significant because at the end of the day, there is so much more you can do post the deal stage to ensure that those goals are being met. And which is why I said that this group is so diverse because, on one hand, you've got someone, there are various goals that we've identified. And if the audience is listening into just the kind of work that is taking place, to me, at least, it's fascinating because it gives you hope, it gives you a sense of purpose, and it helps you understand that, yes, while all of this was a nice to have, while diversity was a buzzword, inclusion was a buzzword, while we were having all these conversations all these years, now you're seeing real action on the ground, and now you're seeing real measurable actionable goals being put in place, and each one of you spoke about is testament to that. Let's take forward the discussion, and now that we understand each of your roles and how you're contributing towards this, let's try and identify what is it that's working and what is it that's not. And so let's start with what doesn't work, because a lot is working clearly, but what is it that doesn't work when it comes to the overall theme of gender lens investing? And I know that we not every initiative, not every intent and move and decision is something that needs to yield results. Maybe Jessica, I'll put that across to you because you've been part of a much wider industry-wide initiative and something that has seen a lot of action on the ground. Share with us something that may have started as an idea or started as an initiative, but did not really take off in the way you had thought initially.
Sure, yeah, very happy to. So let me address this from, it's very mingled what has worked and what hasn't, so but I will try to focus on what hasn't worked. So something that we've seen is that we can really have a big multiplier effect by investing in private equity, venture capital, and debt funds that in turn invest in local businesses. And so that has been an important strategic focus for us as DFIs, but also for the 2X challenge. And we came up with the concept of 2X flagship funds, which is a relatively new strategy where we said, okay, on the one hand, we want to focus on the established fund managers, and we want to nudge them to really define very ambitious goals for themselves. And these goals are written down or agreed in a formal MOU, and they are publicly communicated. The first one, for example, was in the Financial Times, so it's a very public commitment, and the reputation is on the line. But they also get all the support from the DFIs and 2X members to go on this journey. And they make a commitment both at the GP level to transform the own organization, so the what was just mentioned, diversity at partner level, how do you create the pipeline, how do you hire and recruit, all of that, as well as at the portfolio level. So the kind of value creation work that you do with the companies. What has worked quite well, surprisingly well, to be honest, in hindsight, is to get these established, fully commercial and mainstream private equity and venture capital funds to go on this journey with us. That has been a big surprise, and it has worked quite well. What interestingly hasn't worked so well, and that is from the perspective of us as LPs, as capital allocators, is to back the new emerging funds that are launched by very experienced private equity and venture capital professionals, usually women, usually local women. So not expatriates, but really women who are well-grounded in their own industry, who have a ton of experience in established funds and then go out, spin off or out, start their own team and launch a fund that has a gender lens and a culture of diversity and inclusion from day one. So that is exactly the kind of innovation that we want to see in the field. But what hasn't worked well is to get the LP community behind them, to really back them and get capital into
Jessica,
the hands of
why would that be the case? And is it because it is seeming like a force fit? It is something which is not evolving as a natural progression, and it is something that is seen to be, you set the goal and then you're trying to achieve that goal by force fitting it. Is that the reason, or why do you think you've not got the kind of commitment you thought you would? And it seems like a sitter. It seems like something which is the right thing to do.
Yeah, the problem is, I think there is an element of unconscious gender bias. But I think more importantly is that the capital allocators, and that's DFIs, pension funds, and so on, they have always had very strict and rigid criteria of how they invest. So they always invest in fund managers with a track record, and track record is narrowly defined as this exact team with this exact strategy has been around for decades. I mean, to exaggerate the point, but they have raised one or two funds in the past. They have been successful. It's a continuation. Now we back them. And so, of course, if it's perceived as a first-time fund, that's perceived as higher risk. It's potentially perceived as a new strategy, a new team that's coming together. So I think we as an industry, and especially on the LP side, we really have to overcome this of always backing the same people we've always backed for the past decades, because that is what is often happening.
Right, Jessica, and it's debatable whether it's right or wrong, and is that the kind of change we want to see, or the decision, or the rather larger strategy is something which is right? And Vidya, I'd like you to jump in here, because taking forward what Jessica said as an experience, perhaps going back to the point that you were making, that not necessary that everything that we need to do on this goal, to achieve this goal, has to be in a pre-deal or an investment decision making stage. A lot can happen post investments too. So perhaps what Jessica is trying to explain is that very often we think that those goals are the goals that need to be met during the investment. So is that something you'd like to talk about a little more from your experience, and again sharing something that's not worked and worked?
Sure, thanks. So I think if you have an intentional GLI focus or strategy, then you would need to look at it pre-investment. But we don't have that. Our development impact teams are looked at post-investment, and we find that there's value in that as well. So for example, when we look at our portfolio, and again, referring back to the case that was made for larger attention to be given to women as consumers, as small business owners, who to benefit from the products and services that our portfolio companies are engaged in, and to crowd private market investment into such companies. I think that is important, and that's perhaps an area where we are able to focus on. So we look closely at our portfolio companies. We start with measurement. So we've now got 1 year of quarter-on-quarter measurement, and that will continue. So we look deeply at women from a 360-degree perspective, as consumers, as employees, as small business owners, as well as leaders in the portfolio and founders. And we look inward as well. So when we look at our portfolio companies in this way, it sets us apart in terms of the strategy that we employ. And what has worked for us, therefore, is, when our investment strategy itself is to invest in companies that are solving real problems in India that can be scaled domestically as well as globally. So in that sense, there is a lot of scope for socioeconomic growth and empowerment, and in bringing the 400+ million Indian consumers into the wider net of access to services and products. So beyond that, when we look at the power of technology to achieve impact at scale, and specifically to achieve gender impact at scale, I think that's something that we are able to definitely converge on and deliver, being a technology-focused fund. And we find that the business case for serving women as consumers and for making use of opportunities such as in digital health, etc., which have only emerged stronger post-COVID, is definitely areas where our portfolio companies are doing extremely well. So we find that once we make the investment, we are able to now begin to measure where gender lies within our portfolio company, and that is bringing about awareness within our founders. But the key really there is sponsorship. And in order to be able to take data to insights to action, that sponsorship within the portfolio is very important when we start working on certain projects, building best practices for diversity, equity, and inclusion, beginning to look deeper at how we retrofit and improve, let's say, product, services, standard operating procedures, marketing and communications for women as consumers, and the like. So I think that sponsorship is key. The sensitization has certainly begun, and the awareness has certainly begun. So these are the ways that we are working with our companies. And I think in terms of what has not worked, we still have a long way to go. A lot of this is done through influence because these do not form part of contractual obligations with our investee companies.
Right.
It requires stakeholder sponsorship. It requires buy-in. Some of that is behavioral change, and that takes time to set in. And more importantly, we need to crowd in action from the industry and build network effects.
Yes.
Because this is not something that 1, 2, or 3, or a handful of fund managers or LPs
can do.
can.
I think the network effect is absolutely important, Vidya, and which is why conversations happening at a platform like IVCA are important, because that's how you create that network effect around those conversations. Vidya, I want you to also very quickly touch upon the timing of something like this. We like I said right at the beginning, these are conversations that have been happening for decades. But do you think we're at some point of an inflection point where there is clear realization that we have to move away from this being just a conversation to something where we need to deliver action? And the reason I say that is because, we see firms like Chirate, for instance, showing and measuring that impact.
Absolutely. I think, I think there is a convergence of a focus on gender in India across many different areas. It's women investing. I remember being at the launch of WinPE back in January or February of 2020. I see the focus on women from a 360-degree perspective with respect to the 2X challenge. And the fact that for this next year alone, there's a $15 billion allocation towards the 2X challenge and qualification for that. I think that is a clear signaling, and it's where the market is heading. It's good for business, and it's the right thing to do as well. So its time has come.
Right, and enough studies they're talking about why it's not just the right thing to do. And as Vidya said, it's fantastic for business as well. And I think enough and many studies have pointed towards the fact that this clearly has a positive business impact as well. Quickly moving on to Nupur, and of course, Vidya talked about the launch of WinPE and talked about why that was very significant and the timing of that. Nupur, I'd like you to focus on whether it is important for us to try and do a bit of everything, or it's important for everyone who's committed to the cause to take up one chunk in one part of this and try and say, what, this is the part that I will impact. And when I say that, I think when we look at gender lens investing, it is spread across a number of areas. We've talked about investing, for instance, in women-owned or women-led enterprises as being one part of it. Investing in enterprises that themselves promote workplace equity could be one part of gender lens investing, or perhaps investing in companies that, as Vidya was very importantly saying, they're catering to products and services that are improving the lives of women. And in that sense, you're indirectly, furthering the cause of gender equality. Or as you said, Nupur, your clear focus has been to make the investment ecosystem per se diverse and have more people within, because you believe, from what I understand, you believe that if you have that gender lens, you're going to make very different investment decisions as well. So help us understand why it's important to have a very narrow focus when we're achieving these goals, and also to my earlier question on what's worked and what's not.
Absolutely, Shweta. So, let me just say that I don't think it's a narrow focus. I think the focus is exactly the same. It's just the approach. So, this is the way we think about it at WinPE. And all our partner firms, all our member firms say this unanimously. They say change has to begin at home. They say we need to have credibility within ourselves before we can go to anybody else and start talking to them about gender diversity. And Jessica referred to the multiplier effect that the EVC industry has, right? So what, the approach at WinPE is very, very simple. It is saying, you as investors, or we as investors, how are we thinking about gender diversity? How integrated is that in our regular day-to-day operations? Is it something specific that is sitting in one box, in one corner, and you have one champion or one specialist keeping an eye on it? Is it post facto? Is it post-mortem? Or is it something that is really part of the culture? So, if you think about it, the workplace was invented hundreds of years ago by men, for men. And that workplace design really hasn't changed, whereas the workforce composition has significantly changed. So, one of the things we want to do at WinPE is to change that workplace environment. It's not only about hiring. I mean, we all know the funnel. The funnel at the bottom is really wide. But what happens as things progress upwards? And, a lot of people talk to me about, oh, we lose women, when they have a life event and, when they have kids and all of that stuff. And, it bothers me over, say, a 3 to 4 decade professional career, 30 to 40 years of working. Does my ultimate, success, my ability to ultimately be successful depend on those 6 months that I took for maternity leave? Or maybe 12 months if I got pregnant twice, or whatever factor. And it really bothers me when things start to get boiled down to such specific generalizations. So what we're doing at WinPE is basically just this conversation, and it's just amazing. And the market imperatives are different. We have people who say, I've got daughters and I can't imagine them making a successful career in PEVC. This industry is really not geared to do justice to female talent. And then, of course, there are fund managers who want to do it because their LPs want to do it. And there are fund managers who think it's great PR. There are fund managers who think it's just the right thing to do. I mean, the spectrum of reasons is very different.
Right.
Ultimately, what is happening is that people are saying, we are ready to change.
Yeah.
And we are ready to spare change. So let me just go back to how we are approaching this. So it is a step-by-step approach. At WinPE, we spent the first year with clear action items. And, we've been very excited. Sequoia has been one of our partners from day one, right? Sort of identifying what are the changes we want to make. Spent a year in achieving all of those KPIs and action items and saying, yes, now we are ready to go to our portfolio companies. And this year, the conversation has begun with the investee companies, taking multiplier effect. And when you go to the investee companies, you're basically looking at women on boards. You're looking at women at leadership levels. You're looking at women in the workforce, in the supply chain, and of course, women as customers. So, it's just a very different approach, I think, to what the 2X challenge is doing. And I think they just go so wonderfully well together because ultimately money talks.
Absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head, Nupur, with that. And, I think what I really appreciate about what you said now and your previous intervention is that you're saying, let's not forget that we need to first tackle the basics. And Ami, I'd love your thoughts around this, because you've again talked about very diverse set of experiences through your career, from being in a very male dominated environment to now being with NIF. That's surprisingly and absolutely positive surprise for me to know about the diversity ratio there, to then being also part of a larger ecosystem like infrastructure that continues to be very male dominated. So we do see these pockets of change. We do see there is hope, but then you go back to the basics and say, you know what, we still need to tackle unconscious biases, as Nupur was saying. Why discredit so many others when we ourselves may have maybe part of that entire environment where stereotypes still exist, where unconscious biases still exist, spaces where we need to tackle the basic questions before we start to tackle the broader and the taller goals that we're setting for ourselves, for the VCPE industry, for the investment industry, for the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So Ami, your thoughts there again on whether we need to continue working on the foundational level stuff before we move upwards. And again, I would love your thoughts on what's worked according to you and what's not.
Sure. So Shweta, what I think is happening today is there is tremendous awareness. And there are some changes that are happening because one, people want to change, or second, there's some amount of forced change as well. Because even if people don't agree, they know that that's the direction that we need to take, because there are others in the ecosystem that want certain changes to happen. So if you look at a certain fund and fund diligence that happens today, there are clear gender ratios that get looked at. There are clear, there's a part to say that, okay, if this is not the ratio, you need to get here, in a 1 year time or a 2 year time span, etc. Okay, so there is forced change happening on one side, which is great, I think, for women. Because one is, once you get into the recruitment cycle and you are a part of the organization, it is up to you in terms of how you groom yourself, how you upskill, and how you realize your potential. Of course, you're going to need help from time to time, but it's for you to kind of convert that. And it's not only the job of the man, but also it's kind of a partnership at that point, where once you have access, you kind of go ahead from there. So I do believe that organizations are adapting, but diversity also brings differences in organizations. And that may be challenging, and that aspect also needs to be managed at all levels in the organization. Because there is going to be a difference in thought. There is going to be a difference in how people would like to grow. So all of those differences need to be managed along with the diversity that we're talking about. And that may not be easy as well. So I do think we are on a very, very positive footing compared to where we were, and that work will continue. But I do think that, women definitely today have a much more aware audience on the other side. That's a complete new positive, I would think, compared to when, say, when Nupur would have started in her career, and and the things that she would have seen, or even I would have seen. I think it's a completely different world.
Indeed, a different world, and we've got tons of questions coming in from the audience, so I'll start moving towards those, and I know I want to be mindful of time and take closing comments as well. So one of the attendees has asked, in your experience, are there any sectors that have been lagging in diversity compared to the more prominent ones? Which are these sectors? And do you think more of such concerns at the broad level can be solved at a vocational training level, since we've already missed a few decades? Anyone would like to take that?
Well, I'm in the world of infrastructure, and that's clearly one area that is lagging. So I think I did touch upon this earlier, but the way we've tried to do it is to basically look at the community level where some of these projects are undertaken, and to see if we can give any technical training skills to even train people. For example, the solar project example that I put forth, half the people, it was about a 100 odd count, and 50% were women, and they got absorbed, to construct a piece of the project. We're doing something similar at toll roads as well, where we train toll collectors who can be women. Toll typically happens in shifts, so we ensure that they get the day shift, for example. So there are little things of those types that can be done. I think if all of us in each of our sectors, pick bits and pieces to see where we can, kind of get women participation, I think that's the way to go about it.
I'll quickly add to that. I think I totally agree. We've seen the same thing in terms of infrastructure, where we've had lower female employee participation in logistics and mobility transportation. And we look at sector participation both from women in employment in those sectors as well as women in consumers. And there the picture changes slightly. So you'll find healthcare and education, for example, doing much more for women as consumers as opposed to some of the other sectors. But again, the picture changes when it comes to looking at female employment.
Shweta, if I can just add a few lines there.
Of course, of course.
I think this is not as simple. There are just a ton of factors. There are societal factors, for example. There are socioeconomic factors. I mean, there are gender stereotypes that exist when the girl child is being brought up. I think it's a very, very complex issue, and I don't think it is about not having enough skilled or trained women to enter the workforce. I think if we just look at the constant increase in, say, the percentage of STEM graduates being women, or just the percentage of business school graduates that are women, and we try to correlate that with the presence of women at different levels across different sectors. Clearly, I don't think the funnel is that much of an issue today. I think the issue is larger about women being able to enter the workforce, being able to stay there, and getting the requisite support, not only at the workplace, but also at home.
Absolutely. Let me now quickly bring in the second question that we've got from the attendee, which is, I think, specifically directed at Jessica around the 2X challenge criteria. Are there any, within the 2X challenge criteria, are there any that are particularly more important or relevant in India? Is there anything particular about India while assessing Indian businesses using the 2X challenge criteria?
Yeah, interesting question. So not per se, the criteria are equally important in all contexts, or like have an equal weight. But of course, in a specific context, and that can be the country context, but also the sector context, or simply the business model or the local context, we take stock of where the company currently is, and we usually do a diagnostic of, like, together with the company, of where the opportunities lie. So where are the low-hanging fruits, what are more challenging opportunities to achieve midterm, and then we develop an action plan, and that is always based on the business case as well as on the gender impact case. And yeah, so I think it's fair to say that they all have the same weight. Have we seen differences in the actual kind of adoption or how deals are qualified? We have seen a lot, and especially in India, on the indirect criteria, so the on-landing to local entrepreneurs that meet the criteria, and mostly women-owned and led businesses. But we've also seen interesting qualifications, for example, in healthcare. And there, you may say, okay, that's relatively easy on the employment criterion because it's just a sector where you have a lot of women in employment. But we have also seen very interesting transformation to challenge internal gender stereotypes and to get women into leadership positions, as well as also get more men into lower positions. So to really also address the occupational gender gaps.
All right, with that, we're going to start moving towards closing this very, very interesting panel discussion and start getting in closing comments from our panelists. We clearly don't know how time has flown on this, but it's a discussion that can go on and on and on. But Ami, coming to you first, your thoughts, your key takeaways, and some important suggestions or ideas that you may want to leave on the table.
Sure. So Shweta, what I would like to say is, one is recruiting and going about that correctly, such that you have access to a diverse bunch of resumes, number one. And second, figuring a way to keep the women there, through the right support across the system is critical. I do think that women today are much better placed than a decade ago, and they should make use of the opportunity. Versus finding faults in the system, because, biases cannot be eliminated. I think there are biases within, all of us, sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious. So, we do need to keep that in mind. But, the carpet is ours.
Love that praise. With that, Vidya.
Thanks, Shweta. So I think that the private sector has a tremendous role to play in closing the gender gap in India. And I'm very bullish that we'll get there. But we do have a long way to go from where we are today. But But the good thing is that the momentum and the trajectory has started with various initiatives and networks like IVCA putting a spotlight on the issue. And hopefully more and more fund managers will get excited about the opportunity, the capital allocation that's coming in from the LP and institutional investor base. And together, I'm sure we will be able to see those gender outcomes, both from a representation of women in the industry as such, as well as women as consumers, and ultimately use the power of investment to be able to scale that gender impact countrywide.
Jessica?
Yeah, a lot of very interesting takeaways from today. I think I want to amplify the platform idea of what you mentioned, that we really all have to come together as an ecosystem. And Shrita, you mentioned it at the very beginning. We have just launched a 2X collaborative at the UN Generation Equality Forum last week, which is our new 2X industry body opening up membership to the full spectrum of investors. And so we invite everybody to join us for peer learning, and to embark on this learning and impact journey together.
And Nupur, you get the last word.
Thank you, Shweta. I don't know, I have a lot of thoughts going on in my mind, a lot of things to say. But I think what I want to really highlight today is there is a lot being done, but clearly there is a lot that still needs to be done. And if we all come together and in our own ways, and that's really the concept at WinPE, we all have the ability to influence our own ecosystems. And if you all started making those little changes within our own ecosystems, I think on a collective basis, what we'll be able to achieve is going to be a tremendous positive change. And so at WinPE, when we say, let's work with the firms to make changes in the workplace, how do we see that play out? We see that play out in a couple of ways. And so, in parallel, we are also working with women who are already in the investing ecosystem with sponsorship, mentorship networks, etc. But, it's not enough to tell women that, we know life is challenging, we'll help you deal with it. It is also important to work in parallel to try and reduce those challenges, and over a period of time, just eliminate those challenges. And then when we are working with younger women and saying, but investing is a really fantastic career. And like Ami said, there is an opportunity for the younger generation to really take over this industry. So when we are telling them, please come, be a part of this industry, we're also working with firms and saying, once you have these women come in at the entry level, make sure it doesn't go from like a 36% to a 12% by the time they're reasonably senior, or down to a 7% by the time they make partner level. So I think what we need to do is to say it's not necessarily just a supply issue. It's not necessarily just a demand issue. I think both of them exist, but what we all need to do is to bridge the gap and connect the two, in a positive and a long-term constructive manner.
Absolutely, Nupur. And
it is here.
Right. No, absolutely. We're seeing such positive change coming through. And I think there is no doubt that this has existed way too long for it to continue the way it has. And I think there is recognition across the board that gender diversity is a strength. It's something that will create a virtuous cycle. There are enough studies and reports talking about the positive business impact it has. So I think that it's a given that we need to be now at an inflection point where change has to come and actionable change has to come. And I think today's panel in many ways to me is a testament to the fact that change is coming, because we're seeing clear initiatives being put in place, clear efforts being put in place to ensure that we're working across the board. We need more women fund managers, we need more women investors, we need more women LPs, we need more women GPs, we need more women entrepreneurs, we need more investments going to women entrepreneurs, we need more investments going to companies that are working towards workplace equity, we need more investments going towards companies that are creating products for women and ensuring the betterment of lives of women. So I think there's recognition of change that needs to be brought about across the board. And of course, we need more initiatives like 2X, Jessica, and more such initiatives and the network effect all coming together to achieve the broader and larger goal. And I think it's very important that while gender gap continues to to exist in the investment landscape. This is a change that we hope, at least in a few years from now, is something that we feel that with the collective effort of so many organizations and institutions, we will see that the impact is showing meaningful results. And I think with that, I do want to, on behalf of this wonderful panel, also thank IVCA for truly putting a spotlight on this, for putting together a wonderful panel where we've been able to share so many thoughts and ideas and key takeaways on how we can bring about that meaningful change when it comes to gender lens investing. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and over to Shatapa.
Thank you, Shweta, and thank you all our panelists. It's impossible to not be inspired by such wonderful women power. I've been listening to all of you all and taking down some notes myself. Thank you for sparing the thought, and I really hope that the situation looks great for women, whether it's in the investing community, whether they are young entrepreneurs, and that we continue to retain and are able to increase the representation of women in the workforce as well. Thank you so much, ladies, and everyone who's watching in. It's time for our final session. It's a fireside chat, so please exit this and join us in the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.